Hello, we are going to cover the circulatory system. This can be a hard chapter, so I'm going to, just try to pick out the key components that I feel that you need as a student. Just a couple of reminders that I feel too that's really good for students is to make sure you review the chapter overview, terms to know, learning outcomes, anything with that. So here's the deal. Let's start off here with rheumatic heart disease. A couple of different things. As we know, we have the mitral valve, aortic valve. So the thing is, it's all about association with this. So let's dig right on in. Okay, so rheumatic heart disease, we have chronic rheumatic heart disease. Okay, and usually it'll state that right in there. A couple of different things is ICD-10 presumes that mitral valve disorders of unspecified etiology are rheumatic in origin, okay? And when we're dealing with a rheumatic type of mitral valve, it's going to be I0, okay? If it's non-rheumatic, it's going to be I3. So just something to make sure, write it down as a note. Now, if it's mitral valve stenosis, I assume that it's rheumatic, okay? Mitral valve stenosis, rheumatic. And I am kind of looking, they're giving us some examples at the beginning of the chapter. If it's mitral valve insufficiency, all right, that is non-rheumatic. Okay, stenosis is rheumatic, mitral valve insufficiency is not. Now, if it said mitral valve insufficiency rheumatic, then yes, of course it's rheumatic. Whenever you combined the mitral valve with the aortic valve, you assume that it is rheumatic. So if I have mitral valve stenosis and insufficiency with the aortic valve, again, when I'm doing two valves, I assume that it is rheumatic. Okay, so a couple of different things here. You will have rheumatic heart failure. We have to remember that it's I09.81. Let's go to also with going back to the valves. There is a section here that shows you aortic valve insufficiency, and you'll see that we don't assume that is rheumatic because it's an I35 code. Now, once again, if I mix mitral valve and aortic valve together, then I assume that it is rheumatic, okay, because the two are together, and it's going to be an I08 code. Now, if I have just plain old aortic valve stenosis, I consider this non-rheumatic. But if I had mitral valve stenosis, that's considered rheumatic. So again, combination of the valves, we assume it's rheumatic. Non-combination, it's not rheumatic. Again, mitral valve stenosis, rheumatic. Mitral valve insufficiency, non-rheumatic. So what you can do is look on exercise 27.1. Okay. Pause the tape and let's just go with what we feel is rheumatic and not rheumatic. Okay, so hopefully you went through, wrote down whether you thought it was rheumatic or non-rheumatic. I'm not going to give you the code, but number one, we have mitral regurgitation. Doesn't say stenosis, okay? So with that, it's non-rheumatic. Now, number two, we have mitral valve stenosis. Since it's the stenosis, it's rheumatic. Three, same thing. Mitral valve stenosis, but it's with aortic insufficiency. The two combined, rheumatic. Okay? Same thing with number four, combined, rheumatic. Number five is going to be congenital. Number six, again, we're combining both valves, rheumatic. And the same thing with number seven. Okay, let's move on here then. Ischemic heart disease. Okay, with this, we are looking for, it's a general term for disorders of the myocardium, and this is caused by decreased blood flow. So we have ischemic heart disease, some people call it coronary artery disease, anything on that effect. So here are the common terms, okay? And I was always told it just kind of depended. A lot of times where the physician went to medical school on what term that they would utilize. One nice thing here is if we have coronary arteriosclerosis with angina pectoris, it's one code. We do not code these out separately. Okay, one thing with angina pectoris, these are the symptoms. Okay, unstable angina is I-20.0. Is the principal diagnosis. This is very important. Underline this, make notes. Only when the underlying condition has not been identified and there's no surgical intervention. It's the only time I can use that as a principal diagnosis. Otherwise, you need to find like coronary artery disease or something like that as your principal diagnosis. So keep that in mind. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is myocardial infarctions. Okay, keep in mind, this basically in lay terms means heart attack. Okay, so with an MI, a couple of different rules. Okay, so we have an MI with a duration of 4 weeks are classified to an ST elevation, which is an IT or I2 1.0 through I2 1.3. The fourth character, this is very important, indicates the wall involved. If you are coding and you have the information, you should know the wall involved. Okay, so I don't want to see a 9 there for unspecified. Now a non-ST elevation is an I2 1.4. So make sure you read up on the elevations and again for your MIs. Okay, so let's go here. We have 5 characters, which will be your coronary artery. We have, let's go to the next area here. So let's go into STEMIs. There is information on the type 1 ST elevation. Okay, so again, usually if somebody's in there with a STEMI, what they try to do is give them thrombolytic therapy and then get it down to a non-STEMI. Okay, so here's the deal. If a STEMI converts to a non-STEMI due to a thrombolytic agent, you still code it as a STEMI. Okay, if they had a non-STEMI and it turned into a STEMI, you're going to code the STEMI just because that's more severe. All right, so with the myocardial infarction, if a patient has a new type 1 within 4 weeks of the initial AMI, okay, anterior, you assign I22 with category I21. Okay, so again, if I had 2 basically myocardial infarctions within 4 weeks, I'm going to assign again category I22 because this is my second one, and then also I21 for that first one I had. When a patient requires continued care for the type 1 MI, you're going to use that I21 codes from the onset through the duration all the way up to 4 weeks. Okay. The last thing you want to talk about is if the AMI is healed or old, you're going to use a history code, I25.2, for that old MI not requiring further care. Okay, another little point here. If a subsequent MI of one of the types occurs within 4 weeks of an MI of a different type, okay, so if I had inferior, went to anterior, the appropriate codes from category I21 to identify each type. At this point, do not assign a code from category I22, okay? Again, because this is a different type. I22 should only be assigned if both the initial and subsequent are both type 1 or unspecified. So type 3, usually it's MI resulting in death. When post-infarction hypotension occurs following AMI, you want to sequence the AMI first. Then we have evolving, which could go into heart failure. And then we have just different complications of an acute MI. All right, so let's go ahead. We are going to move to, we have chronic ischemic heart disease. All these are basically stated as they are written out. So you just need to take the time, read through the coding. Okay, so heart failure is the next one. So with heart failure, it's I50. Occurs when the abnormal cardiac function results the inability of the heart to pump blood at a rate to meet the body's needs. Okay, so one thing to remember, pulmonary edema is included in heart failure codes. So if my little scenario states patient has congestive heart failure with pulmonary edema, I only code the congestive heart failure. Okay, we have two different categories of heart failure. We have systolic, diastolic. Okay. Congestive heart failure is included in the codes for systolic and diastolic. Ventricular heart failure, which is unspecified. All right, we have all these different types of heart failure. So again, just read the documentation. Okay, so then we're going to get into hypertension. Hypertension, heart disease with heart failure and chronic kidney disease. We'll talk about this when we actually get into the hypertension a little bit more. We have I-11, I-12, I-13, which we'll talk about. Okay, these again, please just read through these. A lot of these that I go through so quickly through, it's just telling you what the code is and what condition it is. Cardiac arrest is causes unspecified as principal or first listed diagnosis if the cause is unknown. So a lot of times if a patient is admitted due to cardiac arrest and an underlying condition is not found, you are going to assign I-46.9 as your first listed diagnosis. But usually, again, you're going to find why that patient had cardiac arrest. So, aneurysms, again, read through this. It just talks about different codes for aneurysm. Cerebrovascular disorders. Again, keep in mind, these are basically your strokes. You have TPA therapy used for that. You have a TIA, which is a stroke that resolves in 24 hours. Full-blown stroke would be a cerebral vascular accident. Okay, so I want to get to our next big thing here is going to be hypertension. So I am going to end this video and we will start a new one